Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so I thought I'd spend some time just sharing my story, about some of my work experience, some of my travel highlights, and also a little bit about my current role today. And I'd love to open it up in the end for any questions or any comments that the group has. And so my story starts out in New York City on a weekday evening, and I'm on the 7 train on my way back home. And I'm actually scrolling through Facebook, and I see an ad for something called Remote Year. I'd never heard of it until then, and for whatever reason, it piqued my interest. And I think it was a 10-second clip of these really cool aerial drone shots of people working on their laptop, and the backdrop was this exotic beach at sunset, and it just looked picture perfect. And so words pop up and says, do you want to work and travel? And I just thought that was such an interesting concept. So I immediately clicked to learn more. And that's when I learned about a company called Remote Year. And what they do is they bring together a group of professionals of 30 or so, and they travel the world together for 12 months. And they live in one city for 1 month, to a total of 12 different cities. And for a monthly fee, Remote Year, what they do is they take care of your airfare between the cities, they take care of your housing, your workspace, and they also curate activities for you to bring you closer to the community you're living in. And all you needed to do was bring a job. And at that time, remote working isn't new. It's been around for decades. But that was the first time I personally had heard of it. And I remember it resonated with me because I always felt that work never needed to be tied to a particular location, obviously, depending on the work itself. And so I immediately sent in an application the next day. And part of me sent that application because I've always loved traveling. And I traveled as often as I could, but it was always a dream of mine to just see more of the world. And I didn't want to see the world in 1 week increments where I had to carefully plan and meticulously save all my vacation days. And even when I did go on vacation, it just felt like there was never enough time to really get past the surface of the touristy must-sees. I really wanted to connect with the city, and I thought a 1 month stay would be perfect. And so I really resonated with the idea. But up until then, I also never had the courage to really give up on my career. I worked so hard to build it. And Remote Year seemed to kind of be the answer to that. And so that was the day on that 7 train that an ad on Facebook changed my life, which is such an odd thing to say, but it did. And so it's weird because Remote Year came at the right moment in my life, because meanwhile, back at work, things were great, and then things were also kind of bad. To set the context, I was approaching 5 years at NBC Universal. I was promoted to finance manager at the time. I was managing the company's engineering and digital technology solutions. And I really enjoy the work. I enjoy being a manager to my team. I enjoyed working with the different chief technology officers and software engineers. I enjoy financial analysis, working with data. And so these are things that I felt lucky I found. And there were many people and projects that got me excited to get out of bed every morning. So all great things. But there's always a different side to that. There were aspects of the culture that I didn't enjoy, and I actually didn't realize were so toxic really until I left. And I think part of that is because I'd been there for so long. It's so hard to see the extent of how a culture can affect you, especially when it's just tiny increments kind of chipping away at you over a long period of time. And so I'll talk about 2 of the toxic cultures that I experienced. And one was the way we celebrated workaholism. Somehow whoever worked the most hours, picked the most projects, whoever's personal life was kind of hanging by a thread, and you can kind of tell by the dishevelment of their looks, That was the most celebrated employee. And oftentimes it wasn't even a product of his own work. It's just the sheer amount of brute force of working extra hours. And I never understood that, and I still don't. The person I thought that should be celebrated was the one packing up at 5 p.m. because she found a way to finish all her work within her 8 hours and managed to sneak in an hour lunch. The person who's excited to leave work because she's on her way to other activities that fulfill her life. As you can imagine, that girl was me, but she was not celebrated. The assumption that other people felt or thought of me was I wasn't doing enough. And, if I could leave at 5, then I didn't have enough work. And that judgment really slowly ate at me. Another aspect of the culture that was really toxic was the fact that differences weren't celebrated. They kind of treated it like a virus, something that had to be stopped immediately. Looking back, I remember rarely being asked for my opinion, but I gave it freely anyways. And over the past 5 years, I got in a lot of trouble for it. And don't get me wrong, there was never a kind of question about the quality of the work I produced or the relationships I've built with business partners. Or even the savings I drove out of the business, really. But my, what they call executive presence needed work. And that was always the tagline. And the example of this would be when they were asking me or my team to do something that I felt didn't provide any value, or really anytime I felt like the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, I would challenge it because I didn't want my team to be working on something and waste their time. And I was constantly reprimanded because I wasn't being a team player. I'm sure it didn't help that I was the youngest person in the room most of the time, or one of the only females, or one of the only minorities. And so in a place where differences were best kept hidden, I realized that I started to lose my voice. And so I started to beat myself up for being, the odd man out. Why was I the only one who wanted to do things differently? Why was I the only one voicing these concerns or challenging other people? And for a really, really long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. And so, and I share that because I wanted to give some context why remote year felt so like the answer. I felt like I could continue to work and support my org, but I didn't have to be there. To be in the office and with those judgmental eyes and the constant need to suppress how I feel. And so I felt like this was it. This is my answer to everything. And so when I got accepted into remote year after some interviews and sharing my passion for traveling and also work, I presented my case to NBC. At the time, they did not have, and this was 2017, they didn't have a remote working policy. And so I spent the next few months actually working on one with them. I tried to address as many concerns they have and try to solve any issues that would allow people like me in the future to be able to do this. But in the end, they told me they really couldn't come to an agreement. And here's what they kind of told me. Paraphrased, of course. Finance is different than software engineering. You really have to be there in person to be, collaborative. There's so many meetings that we have. HR actually told me that bouncing from country to country, time zone to time zone was concerning for my mental health. Security told me that the countries that I was going to were dangerous. And they were emerging from war or extensive drug issues. Technology told me, I'm not sure about how stable the internet is, and you're putting the company at risk because of all the privacy information on your laptop that you're just bouncing around the world. And what hurt the most was when my manager told me that he didn't believe I could be an effective manager virtually. Needless to say, I went home completely devastated that day. But something else happened on that day. And I remember this so clearly. I began to see the people I work with so differently. The leaders I once admired and respected, um, people I once called my mentors, I lost a lot of respect for them that day. Um, it's kind of like this shattering of a silly image that I built up somehow, that, wow, I'm so lucky to have found a place where they have my best interests at heart. And I couldn't understand why they didn't understand how important this was to me and how much I would respect them more and give back more if they would allow me to do this. And so um, that was a really pivotal moment in my life, I would say, and in my career, because that was the day I realized I had to quit my job to move forward in my career. I remember thinking we give up, so much of our time and our lives to work. And when you finally ask for something in return and you see how they respond, is really how they show their true colors. And I knew from that day on that I had nothing else to give them and they had nothing else to teach me. And so I quietly dropped the subject. And for the next 6 months, I saved every single penny of my paycheck so I would have enough, along with my savings, to be unemployed for the year. Because I was going to go and no one was going to stop me. And so that was really the time I decided to join Remote Year. And so May of 2018, I packed up my life and I headed to Lisbon, and I met 30 other individuals who were crazy enough to be on this journey with me. And I'll share some of my highlights from my trip. So in my year abroad, I spent 4 months in Europe, 4 months in Asia, and 4 months in Latin America. I tried so many different types of alcohol from all over the world, but I'll tell you that this homemade cherry rakia in this village in Croatia, made by an elderly gentleman, is my favorite. I was never a beer drinker, but I fell in love with it, with the draft beers of Czech Republic and Vietnam, and surprisingly even Peru. I've always disliked sake. And so in Japan, I sat in on a sake tasting of 17 different times, and now I'm 1,000% sure that I don't like it. In South America, I tried the natural and unnatural wines, but this Israeli red that I had in this beautiful neighborhood of Kazimierz, Poland, will always steal my heart. I learned a lot about world history, especially World War II, in my month in Prague. If you haven't heard of Operation Anthropoid or seen the movie, highly recommended. There's not a cab driver in Prague who doesn't know the name of Josef Kabček and Jan Kubiš. They were killed in the Czech resistance against Nazi Germany. I had been to Prague 3 times. This is my 4th. And it took me staying in that country for a month to really feel what it felt like to be in Prague just 75 years ago, where it looked very different and felt very different. Also, a really cool fact that I learned, and the next time we're all in Prague one day, is take note of the cobblestone streets. If you see 2 golden bricks instead of the cobblestone in front of a building, it's to commemorate the last known location of Jews that were taken from their home. Felt even closer to the subject when I did a random solo trip to Poland to visit Auschwitz. Later in Asia, I watched the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War, and I actually traced the steps from northern Hanoi through central Vietnam, through Hue and Da Nang. That was incredible. I started taking Spanish lessons twice a week via Skype. And after 8 months before I arrived in Latin America, I was conversational. In the mornings when everyone else was at work, I would kind of put on my backpack and follow them to the workspace as well, even though I was unemployed. And I started to teach myself some computer programming. It had been something I've always wanted to do and just never had enough time. And that was the time to do it. In the evenings or cafe days where we just kind of were tired of the workspace, I started a blog and I wrote about my travels and some reflections. And I told myself I'd publish 2 articles a month because I hadn't written a paper since college, and I needed to work on my writing skills. I spent countless hours at airports and planes, many, many more on boats, on bicycles, on Ubers, on the back of grab bikes in Vietnam. If you haven't heard of a grab bike, it's like calling an Uber, but it's a motorcycle. They zip in front of you, hand you a helmet, put it on, swing back, and they zip around the city. It's the fastest way to get around the city because of all the congested traffic. It's such a thrill. The red taxis in Chiang Mai, floating splavs in Serbia. Floating splavs are essentially kind of like bars on water that are just floating around. Hours on a hot air balloon in the Moroccan desert, and once more over the Mexican pyramids, and many, many more on hikes to see just beautiful views that pierce your heart. I saw sunsets and sunrises from Europe and Asia, on the edge of a cliff, from the middle of a bridge, from a secluded monastery, from numerous rooftop bars, at the top of a cemetery on a mountain. But the summer sunsets in Lima will always have a special place in my heart. I lived out of 1 suitcase and 1 carry-on for the whole year. I wore the same 3 or 4 outfits on repeat. And I love the simplicity of that life, although I had to do laundry essentially every single week because that was all the clothes that I had. And I learned to just live with really bare necessities, and just realize how little I needed. Yeah. And I ate everything. I ate $1 tacos sitting on a bucket in Mexico, and I ate $300 sushi in the famous restaurants of Kyoto. I ate this amazing bun cha, which is a noodle dish in Vietnam, in this ghost alley, and it's named because it opens 3 hours of the day to serve lunch. And once it's gone at night, you can't even tell a restaurant even existed there. Lastly, I was also fortunate enough to work alongside the communities I lived in each month. In Split, we prepared meals for the homeless. And I remember crying on my way home because a particular gentleman told me that that was his first hot meal in months. In Hanoi, we cleaned, polished, and repainted the homes of children who were rescued from human trafficking that were recovering. And in Bogota, Colombia, we raised enough money and built a small home for a Venezuelan refugee family. And it would be their first time, their 3 daughters, ages 11, 7, and 5 at the time, that didn't have to sleep on a dirt floor. And most of all, I met a group of strangers who became my travel family, or tramily, as we call it. And they were people like me who wanted the world to be our office. They were living proof that you can work and travel without giving up one or the other, and inspired me to find that balance when I returned home. And so when I returned home, June of last year, I was determined to find my first remote job. And unbeknownst to me, the skills that I picked up along my year proved to be important for a finance remote job. So many of the roles I was looking at was looking for someone who, not just with the corporate finance experience, but someone with computer programming skills, apparently, and an interest to learn on the job. These remote roles also preferred someone with stronger writing skills over PowerPoint skills, and were incredibly impressed when I sent in my travel blog as my writing sample submission. And lastly, these jobs were looking for someone who wasn't a stranger to remote work, someone who believed that the future of work is remote. And so last week, actually, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at Amazon, where I am the finance controller supporting North America's customer service. my finance team works across 4 different continents in 5 different time zones. And so it doesn't matter where or when the work gets done, just that it gets done. And that's really allowed me to plan my daily schedule and kind of pick up and go on little trips when I feel like it. I'm also happy to say that there I'm often asked for my opinion, and I no longer feel afraid to speak up. And I'm also happy to say that I can say no, but it's met with extreme positivity because it's just understood that we can't do everything. And we have to protect our time and solve problems that will most help our customers. In fact, 3 weeks ago, I led a workshop to teach others how to say no more often because it's something we all need. And while no job is perfect, it's definitely one step closer to the life I want to build. And I remember thinking about this. It took me landing this job and being in this environment to realize that 2 years ago, there really was nothing wrong with me, and I just didn't belong at NBC, and that's okay. And sometimes we just don't belong at places we work. It's not a function of, you know, who we are. It's just not a good fit, and it just took me a really long time to realize that. And I'll leave you with one final thought, which is when I was going back and forth talking myself in and out of traveling, a lot of my friends and family, and even my boss would tell me, Lillian, if it doesn't work out, you can always come back. But what I never told them was the idea of coming back and staying status quo scared the hell out of me a lot more than heading into the unknown. And so I really hope my story does 2 things. One, that it encourages you to invest in your passion and hobbies. I didn't pick up Python or study Spanish or start a blog to impress a company. I like to think that these companies and people were impressed by it, not because of what I did, but because they saw somebody with an attitude for life that surrounded a very learn and be curious mind and someone with bias for action to chase it. I like to think that those things stood me out from the crowd. And, you know, if a company or a friend doesn't appreciate those things about me, then, you know, I don't need them. And the second thing is I hope it encourages you to be brave in facing uncertainty, especially in a time like now. Because I remember when I changed my perspective on that day, that pivotal moment day, I realized that the fear and the unknown and all the questions I had are all good things. I don't know why, but for some reason I thought I was afraid of the unknown or all these questions that would come after because somehow I was less because I didn't have all the answers. But I realized these are all good things. Fear leads to the desire to better understand. Unknown territory kind of leaves, you know, new possibilities to explore, and questions led to more questions and more questions to questions you didn't think you needed the answers to. And so allowing that perspective and uncertainty to inspire you instead of scare you, I think has been extremely important for me personally. And I think once you find yourself stepping out of your comfort zone and into the unknown, you'll realize why you never did it sooner, because I certainly wish I did. And so that really is like my whole story. So thank you all for joining me today and allowing me to share that. I've never done that really with anybody but myself. And so I hope it was kind of helpful.
No, thank you. I think there's some amazing takeaways from what you shared with us today. So I just really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Lindsay, for inviting me to do this. Definitely brought me out of my comfort zone. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Still haven't gotten the Zoom thing. There are, you know, when we kind of created this Chapel Talk series, you were automatically somebody who I thought of because just from seeing some of your updates on Facebook and whatnot, how we've kind of stayed connected over the years. I just think, as Shelly was saying, your message resonates with so many people on so many levels. And selfishly, I was like, I'm going through so many of these things, or I have, so like, I just want to hear somebody else's perspective, you know, from the traveling thing and kind of being dissuaded about that. I ended up in college, I did semester at sea. Not sure if you guys are familiar. It's a full semester, and we lived on a cruise ship. There were about 700 students, and you take classes on the ship while sailing around the world. And, you know, we went to, I think, 13 ports in 15 different countries.
Wow.
And, you know, just the risk of trying new things and new cultures, that was one aspect. But the college I was at the time, University of Vermont, didn't accept it as an acceptable abroad program because they said that we weren't in each place long enough to count, because we were in each country for about 4 to 12 days, depending on the size of the country. And so they really kind of tried to, you know, stop me from going. And I ended up having to withdraw from my college and then going. And then I even had to reapply to get back in my senior year. So I was like, let's hope that they take me. I'd be in a pickle when I got home. But, you know, I ended up taking the risk and doing it anyway. And, you know, no regrets from that at all. So on that travel aspect, you know, I totally get, you know, where you were coming from with people kind of working against you and your passion and, you know, telling you should not do this. But you definitely have to listen, as corny as it sounds, to your inner voice and kind of do what, you know is right for you. And also, so many things you said about just a toxic work environment. Oh gosh, I left a job I was at for 3 years this past February, and I should have left a long time ago, but I'm a nanny and a house manager, so I was really connected with the children and I was staying for them. But it just got to a point where, you know, it just wasn't healthy for my own mental health, and I couldn't do the best work I knew I'd be able to. So, you know, I had to make that decision to leave without having another job lined up. And the game plan when I quit at the end of February was to take a couple weeks off and then apply for a new job. And then we know what happened a couple weeks after February. So I'm currently now in the job hunt. So even just hearing you, you know, say again, you know, I hear it from my mom and my therapist are like, you did the right thing. It's just hearing from somebody else again, you know, whether you don't have your next step set up, it's still good for yourself just to leave one environment so that you can kind of take a breath before deciding the next step. So, you know, it's like I said, whether you're in finance or childcare or an artist or whatever, you know, there's all sorts of careers that just you might be in, and that specific position isn't for you. So knowing when to do something different is so key. But it's, you know, it definitely takes a lot of bravery. And, you know, so like I said, seeing you who has come out on the other end kind of gives me a little hope myself.
Good. So much of what you just said resonated with me, because I think it's easy to just say, you know, I dislike everything about my job. You know, I don't think that's the case. I think there are lots of, you know, things we enjoy and things we don't. And it's just, how do you choose when is the right time to give those things you enjoy? And I don't think it's easy, but I do agree with you, Lindsay. It's just listening and asking yourself those hard questions, or easy hard questions, as I call it. Are you happy? You know, does it fulfill you?
Right.
Do you feel like you can move? Are you better? You know, and it just, I say these are easy, hard questions because they're simple in thought, but just hard to answer because we're kind of afraid of what those answers will be. And as I started to ask myself these questions, it just became more and more clear. And I am super lucky to be where I am. And so I would say, keep at it. I received hundreds of rejections before I received this one that was just, I thought, a perfect fit. So don't settle. You're worth so much more. And I believe in you.
Thank you. That's so sweet. And, you know, the thing about settling, I think, is so important too, because often when you are on a job hunt for any reason, you know, sometimes you're nervous. Oh gosh, like they're offering it to me. And whether it's not the pay that, you know, you're looking for, or just not the right work environment, if you don't get a good vibe from the office atmosphere on an interview, I mean, you owe it to yourself to be picky, because again, it's your happiness, and you don't, you know, I feel like it's better to wait a few more months or even longer to find something where you're not, you know, dreading waking up in the morning to go to work. So even though it can be tempting, like, all right, it's been this long without a paycheck, or I just want something, you know, before the resume gap gets too big, I think in the long run, it's definitely best to, you know, hold out and listen to your instincts. But the one thing you said that I strongly disagree about and was a little upset, I was in Vietnam, and the motorbike situation was the most terrifying experience of my life. I went on one, we made it about 2 blocks before he had to pull over because I was slapping him, let me out of here, get me off. But, oh gosh, I'm like getting hot thinking about it. But I survived my 2 block motorbike ride.
It's so fun. I would have like find any excuse just to go. Can we go to that place kind of far where we can't really walk but have to take a motorbike?
No, thank you. I'm fine. I will walk. I'll take a car. We're good. Oh my gosh. But yeah, if nobody else has anything else, you know, as I just said, this was a great reference to have, and so many different aspects of everything you've gone through will touch somebody, I feel like, in some other way. So thank you so much for this. It was a treat. It was great to hear.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me and joining me today.
Yeah. And so I hope everybody stays safe and healthy, and we'll get through this crazy time.
Yes. And please stay in touch.
Yes. Definitely.
Once it's safe to do so, make sure everyone comes back to campus.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much.
Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.